Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Yeah, it is great to be here for this one. This is going to be big.
Today we're doing something a little dangerous. We are taking the concept of God, something billions hold sacred, and we're putting it on the operating table.
For a materialist autopsy.
Exactly. We're analyzing Bayrant Esenoglu's book, The Mystery of Religions. And just to give you the 30-second snapshot, this is not a theological debate. We're not asking if God exists.
No.
We're exploring the argument that God is a human invention, a projection of our social needs that evolved right out of the commune structure of early humanity.
The central idea is that we didn't fall from grace.
We invented the divine to explain our own social chains.
That's the perfect summary. Esenoglu treats religion not as some mystery from the heavens, but as a fossil of human history.
A fossil, I like that.
Yeah, he argues that every attribute we give to God, whether it's a loving mother, an angry father, a potter with clay, it tells us nothing about the universe.
But everything about us.
Everything about the economic and social stage we were in at that exact moment. We're tracing this evolution from savagery to barbarism and then to civilization.
It's a fascinating premise. Basically, tell me how you make your living, hunting, herding, farming.
And I'll tell you who your God is.
Right. Now, before we really start cutting into this, I just have a quick request. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really, really helps us keep these deep dives coming.
So where do we begin the autopsy?
We have to start before God even existed. The text talks about the Paleolithic era, the commune. Most people assume we're, hardwired to believe. But Esenoglu disputes that, doesn't he?
He does. He starts with the period anthropologists call savagery. And his argument is that in the true primitive commune, there was no God.
Why?
Because there was no individual.
That's a concept that's so hard for us to get our heads around today. We're so obsessed with the self.
I know, but imagine a beehive. Does a single ant have an existential crisis? Does it see itself as separate from the colony?
No, of course not.
He argues that early humans were so integrated with their clan and with nature that the concept of I it didn't exist. There was only we.
You were just a limb of the group organism.
Exactly. And if there's no I, no separate self, there's no need for a higher power to judge you or save you. You're just part of the flow.
So the invention of God actually requires the invention of the self first. We had to break the hive mind. How does that happen?
Well, the snap was psychological, and it was driven by the first great social law, the sexual taboo.
Ah, the incest prohibition. This is the Freudian angle the book takes.
It is, but it's grounded in anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
When the early commune banned relations between parents and children, it created this massive conflict in the human psyche. For the first time, what you wanted to do was at war with what you were allowed to do.
The birth of repression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This conflict splits the mind in two. You have your conscious mind, which follows the tribe's rules, and then the unconscious, where all those forbidden desires get locked away.
And this internal split, this voice of desire versus the voice of law.
It created the sensation of a second person living inside you.
And that second person becomes the soul.
Yes. The soul isn't a divine spark, it's a psychological scar. The double. The source points to the Australian Aborigines, the Huron tribes. They believed the soul was a literal tiny version of themselves living in their chest.
That's not a ghost. It's a physical sensation of being torn.
Right. It's such a materialist explanation. But how do we get from, I have a double inside me, to, there is a God up there?
By projecting it outwards.
He projected outwards. Which brings us to totemism.
The animal spirits.
Yeah, the totem. But it's not just worshiping a bear or an eagle. The totem was the collective soul of the entire clan. It represented the rules, the unity, the survival of the group.
So when they worshipped the totem,
they were actually worshiping their own social bond, their own society.
There's that famous quote in the text, I think it's Marx, creators bowed in fear before their own creations.
Precisely. Humans built the social structure to survive. They projected that structure onto an object, a totem. And then, over generations, they forgot they built it. They started fearing the totem as if it were some separate, all-powerful entity.
We scared ourselves with our own shadows.
It's the ultimate alienation.
Yeah.
The sacred is just the social in disguise.
And this disguise evolves as society changes.
The disguise changes, which leads us to the biggest shift in religious history, the gender of God.
Right. If you walk into a church, mosque, synagogue today, God is almost universally he, the father.
Always the father.
But the book says this is a pretty new development.
Oh, very new in the grand scheme. For a very, very long time, God was a woman, the mother goddess.
And this wasn't just, a random choice. It was, again, economic.
It was sociologic and economic. In the lower barbarism stage, the hunter-gatherer phase society was matriarchal.
Why the mother?
Because the mother is the obvious source of life. In a communal marriage structure, the father's role wasn't always clear or central. But the mother, she produces the life. She feeds the life. She is the center.
So they assumed the creator of the universe must be a mother, too.
Of course. The text mentions Isis, the Egyptian goddess, who says, "I am the mother of nature." You look at the archaeological record, it's full of these Venus figurines, pregnant women, fertility goddesses.
So where did the men go wrong? How did we get to the angry father god?
2 words. Private property.
Really? That's it.
It sounds a bit unromantic, doesn't it? But Esinolu argues the domestication of animals. The herding revolution changed everything. For the first time, you have surplus wealth, herds of cattle, sheep.
And herding was typically seen as men's work?
Correct. So men became the owners of the first real capital. And once a man owns a herd, he wants to pass that wealth to his son, not his sister's son, like in a matriarchy.
But to do that, he needs to be absolutely sure the son is his.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which requires monogamy for the woman to ensure paternity. This is what Engels called the world historic defeat of the female sex. The lineage flips from mother to father because the property had to flow from father to son.
And because the patriarch now ruled the tribe and owned the food.
The god in the sky had to become a patriarch too. The mother goddess was demoted, demonized, or married off to a dominant male god. Zeus, Yahweh, Odin, they all rise with the herds.
This also links to the concept of the holy. The book has a very cynical take on what holy actually means.
Is it cynical or is it functional? In the commune, everything was shared. You didn't need a thou shalt not steal law.
Because there was nothing to steal, it all belonged to everyone.
Right. But once you have a chief with a private herd of 500 sheep, he needs a way to protect them from the rest of the hungry tribe.
He can't guard them all the time.
No. So he invents taboo. He says, these sheep are sacred. If you touch them, the spirits will punish you. The holy was basically a keep-off sign invented to protect private property.
That is incredibly effective. Police need salaries. Religious fear is free.
And it's self-enforcing.
Let's pivot to one of the most specific examples, the story of Abraham. Ibrahim, it's foundational. Sacrifice.
And this is where Esinolu really shines, connecting myth to material history. We all know the story. God tells Abraham to kill his son. He agrees. At the last second, God stops him and provides a ram.
And it's usually taught as the ultimate test of faith.
That's the theological reading. The anthropological reading is that this story is a historical document. It's recording a massive economic shift.
The transition from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice.
Precisely.
Wait, human sacrifice was the norm.
In lower barbarism, yes. Resources were incredibly scarce. Starvation was a constant threat. The tribe simply couldn't support unlimited mouths.
So they sacrificed the firstborn.
Often, yes. The first fruits were given back to the earth to ensure the survival of the rest. It was horrific, but it was survival logic.
But then Abraham comes along, he's a herder, he has flocks.
He represents middle barbarism.
Hmm.
He has wealth, he has food on the hoof, he has relative abundance.
So society no longer needs to sacrifice children to control the population.
They can afford to keep them. And the ram.
The ram is the substitute.
The ram is the substitute. The myth is telling society, we don't do that old brutal thing anymore. God accepts the ram now. It sanctifies a technological upgrade. The domestication of the ram saved the son.
An economic transition wrapped in a miracle. We're rich enough now to stop killing our kids.
Put bluntly, yes. And notice the conflict between Cain and Abel.
The farmer and the shepherd.
Right. God rejects the farmer's offering but accepts the shepherd's. It seems unfair, but historically, the nomadic herders were the dominant military and economic force. The myth was written by them, so of course God prefers their lifestyle.
History is written by the winners, and theology is written by the wealthy.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's talk about creation. We have this image of God forming Adam out of clay. Dust, mud, why dirt? I mean, if I were inventing a myth, I'd say we were made of sunlight or star stuff.
You say that today because we know what stars are. But go back to when these myths were written. It was the pottery age.
The high-tech revolution of its time.
Pottery was the AI of its day. It changed everything. You could store water, cook food, settle down. The potter was the ultimate creator, taking formless mud and turning it into a structured, useful vessel.
So when they imagined a creator, they just imagined a really big potter.
Exactly. The Egyptian god Khnum is shown at a potter's wheel, literally spinning humans into existence. The Sumerian myths use the clay of the deep. We project our means of production onto the heavens.
So if we were created during the Industrial Revolution, God would have forged Adam in a blast furnace.
Or today, God would be coding our DNA in Python. We can only imagine God using the tools we already possess.
Now, there's a specific detail in that story. The rib, Eve from Adam's rib. It always seems so weirdly specific.
It is weird until you look at the linguistics. This comes from Sumerian myth. In Sumerian, there's a word ti.
T-I.
Yes. And ti has two meanings. It means rib, but it also means life.
Ah, so it's a pun.
It's a double entendre. There was a Sumerian goddess named Ninti. Her name meant both the Lady of the Rib and the Lady of Life. It was poetic. The woman is the source of life.
But then the story travels.
It traveled to the Hebrew scribes. And in Hebrew, the word for rib does not mean life. The pun is lost. But they kept the object.
So they lost the life part, the part that gave the woman power, and just kept the bone part.
And look at the consequence. Eve is no longer the Lady of Life. She becomes a spare part, a derivative of man. That mistranslation was weaponized to reinforce patriarchy.
It's terrifying how a linguistic slip-up can justify thousands of years of social hierarchy.
It shows these eternal truths often hang by a very thin thread.
We have time for one more. The flood. Noah's Ark. Every culture seems to have a flood myth. The book says this isn't about rain.
No, Esinolu is firm on this. The flood is a metaphor for social chaos, specifically the conflict between civilization, the cities and the river valleys, and barbarism, the nomadic tribes outside.
The people inside the walls versus the people outside.
Exactly. In ancient Mesopotamia, the irrigation canals were the lifeblood of the city. If an invading horde of nomads came through, their first tactic was to destroy the dams and canals.
And if you break the dams in a flat river delta,
You get a literal flood. But emotionally, to the city dweller, the invasion itself was a flood, a wave of humanity destroying their ordered world. The flood myth is a memory of war and collapse, rewritten as a divine cleansing.
the waters of chaos are actually armies.
Yes. And the ark represents the survival of the culture, the seeds, the animals, and the righteous few who preserve civilization to rebuild after the chaos recedes.
It's incredible how consistent this view is. Every time there's a miracle, Esinulu points to a social struggle.
That's the power of the autopsy. It doesn't deny the importance of the stories. It just relocates them. They aren't stories about heaven. They're stories about earth, about how we learned to farm, fought over property, and scared ourselves into behaving.
So if we step back and look at the whole picture, what's the takeaway?
The takeaway is that religion is a mirror. It's a fossil record of our social evolution. When we were in a commune, the spirits were communal. When we had kings, we put a king in the sky.
We create God in our own image.
Always. And that's why this analysis matters. It forces us to ask, what human need created this dogma?
Yeah.
What social structure was this protecting?
It really humanizes the divine. Our ancestors were just people trying to make sense of a confusing, dangerous world with the tools they had.
And trying to maintain order.
Which brings us to today, and this is the question I want to leave you with.
The inevitable question.
If herding gave us a shepherd god, and pottery gave us a molder god, and kings gave us a lord, what are we creating right now?
Well, we live in the age of artificial intelligence, global surveillance, the cloud. We're building systems that know everything about us, that are invisible but omnipresent, and that can judge us with algorithms we don't understand.
Are we building a new digital totem?
I think we might be. And just like those early humans, we might end up bowing in fear before our own creation.
That is a thought that might keep me up tonight. Thank you for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.